Welcome back to the Wood Factory. Progress is continuing on my Barra-powered Crown Wagon. We took a few weeks break to work on some other projects, but that's all done and we're about to hook back in to get the plumbing done and also get some wiring. And fingers crossed, by the end of this video, we might be able to hit the key. Well, we'll be ready to be able to hit the key. I don't want to hit the key because the engine's due to get pulled apart, but we'll get there eventually. So since then, I have mounted a coolant overflow and also a washer bottle. These are a Raceworks 50mm diameter tube, which one of them houses a washer motor on the bottom. The other one's for coolant overflow. I have made up some power steering lines and some transcooler lines. It's a bit tight in the radiator there, so I ended up using a banjo, which is a 16 by 1.5 bolt, and then a banjo off there to get it out of the transcooler. That's all done, and now we're going to move on to the fuel system. We've got a surge tank we want to mount in the back. Raceworks also have a new billet fuel rail for the Barra, so we're going to bolt that one on. We've got some 1500cc injectors, and we're going to plumb it all using some Raceworks AN lines. So let's head up to the back of the car and talk about fuel pumps and surge tanks.
This being an 80s car, it originally had an external EFI fuel pump. It was very common in the 80s to be laid out like that. Occasionally they had a push pump inside that was low pressure, but a lot of the time they just pulled from the bottom of the tank. Not much surge protection or anything like that, but it worked at the time when cars weren't very fast and didn't go around corners very fast. So Woody's actually replaced the pump on this when he got the car back on the road because the original one was ancient and was weak. So it's actually got a Pierberg screw pump on it at the moment. What we're going to have to do though is fit a surge tank and put a couple more pumps on it because it's obviously going to have 800 horsepower or something like that.
Why does that figure keep changing? I thought it was 600.
No, never said that. I said that old turbo wouldn't make 600. The new turbo will make 900, so that's what we're aiming for.
Okay.
Anyway, back to the fuel discussion. We are going to move the pump. It's up in here, but it's going to have to be moved because there's going to be a very large 9-inch diff swinging up and down there that's going to need a lot more space. So we're going to retain that pump and use it to fill a surge tank. So this is an alternative way of doing a fuel system. There's a few different ways. There's a whole new tank which we use in Kevo and my Crown, that sort of thing. That's not practical in this car because it's a wagon and putting a tank inside the back of it is not going to work, particularly in this car because it's actually got dicky seats in the back which Woody wants to retain. So that's out of the question. The other way of doing it is to fit a pump assembly down inside the tank. That is doable, but in this case I don't think it's going to work very well because again we've got no room between the top of the tank and the floor pan, and you need some space. So we did that on Lee's Tirana and Gav's Hacko, I think. We did two different versions of that. So that's a viable alternative if you've got the space above the tank. But in this case none of those apply, so what we're going to do is use a surge tank. There's heaps of different designs of surge tank. This is a Raceworks one. This one we've chosen because of the available space. We've got this sort of void in here that this will go into. Woody's already cut off the original brackets because they're not suitable, and we're obviously going to modify it a bit from this, but that's going to go up inside there, and it's going to have a couple of pumps coming out of here. We're going to use the same pump as we're using to fill it, a couple of Pierberg 800s. They're a really nice, quiet pump, and they put out a lot of fuel, so it's a good thing so you don't have the buzzing noises of say a Bosch 044 or whatever. This particular surge tank can take multiple different pumps. There's brackets that you put on here to use varying types of pump, whatever you choose. So what we're going to do is try and clear this space. Woody's already been in there and had a little fiddle around and obviously cut those brackets off to try and make it fit up in there, and he's also put the porta power in there to make some space, which in the shed, in our shed language, the porta power is actually the scissor jack out of the Crown, and I think you managed to move it a fair bit. So now we're going to work on mounting that up in there and move on to the plumbing and that sort of thing. Probably should drain the tank, seeing as it's got a drain bung.
The fuel level should be below that anyway though. There wasn't much left. Remember we did a smoko run and scraped on the ground before we hooked in, remember?
I believe you that it would have scraped on the ground, that's for sure. We're using AN lines all the way through the fuel system, and the problem with that is it's kind of like a bit of an addiction where you start using it and then you've got to use it everywhere. And the reason for that is if you don't use AN in one spot, that's your failure point. So this here is the outlet from the fuel tank that used to just go to the pump via a hose. So we've chopped off the extra loopy bits that were on it and just added a -8, that's the suction line, and -6 is the return. I've modified these fittings in the lathe I actually pared them down a lot so we didn't need to use much heat to actually solder them on there. What we did is I tacked them on there first with the TIG, and then we went in to see Luke at Nurse Radiators to silver solder these on, and we ended up doing it ourselves because they're all busy. But anyway, it's not that hard. But sometimes you need to modify stuff to convert older systems like this over to AN. So it's all doable. You just got to think outside the square.
Use your brain, as they'd say.
That's the other thing that some people say.
We're pretty well done with the fuel system plumbing. I'm really stoked with how the surge tank setup came out. I had this vision from the beginning of, okay, I've got 150 mil in between the rail and the body, and the surge tank was 150 mil wide, and ended up just bolting up in there and worked really well. We've then got the feed pump for the surge right next to it. And that's also got a 100 micron filter before it because the old crusty tank in here was still showing some signs of corrosion, so that's going to filter out any schmutz to supply those pumps. We then run a -8 line up the rail into a 10 micron filter, and that leads us up here into the engine bay where we've got our Raceworks fuel rail. The injectors fitted to that rail are just there for test fitting purposes. We do have some Bosch 1500cc injectors to go in, but we are waiting on some full-length adapters so they can be used with that rail. That then feeds into our Go Fast Bits FXD, where did I get B from? FXD fuel pressure regulator, and that's -8 from the rail to the reg, and then we go -6 down into a Haltech flex fuel sensor, and then all the way back to the surge tank via the standard feed line from the car, which we've converted to AN on either end. So the whole system is AN now, which I'm stoked about. There's going to be no failure points. For space reasons, I've also relocated the charcoal canister to the rear of the car in the inner guard. That's just purely because I didn't want to have it up in the engine bay here. It's just too bulky and gets in the way of everything else. As I said, we're almost finished and we're not quite there yet because I still need to do the lines for the fuel pressure regulator. But as usual, everything else is in the way, which includes the aircon lines, and I haven't done them yet. And where I want them to route is right in the path of the return line from the reg down to the flex fuel sensor. So now I'm going to go in and see Luke and Emmett at Noosa Radiators to make up some custom aircon lines. Wait, have we come up with a name for Luke yet, Al, or not?
Young cock?
He didn't want it to be referred to as a phallus though, so
New cock?
maybe just Luke, the bearded guy, I don't know.
Lukey Rooster.
Luke Rooster, we'll come up with something. Anyway, we'll go see them, make up some custom AC lines. Hey, Bull.
Hey, Will.
What's going on?
Yeah, mate.
You reckon you can just quickly sort this out for me, mate? Is this your toolbox? Sweet.
Yeah, mate. No worries.
Do you want to get this? So I've got some marks on there, just straight out of here. You have to clean them up and you'll be able to do that, eh?
Easy, mate.
You're a gun on the solder,
No
aren't you?
worries, mate. Yeah.
Hey, and while I'm here, this look like this here. Is that Land Cruiser spec or not? What do you reckon?
Yep. Looks very much like an 80 series or an old 75 series.
You reckon you can match that up?
Yeah.
Alright, sweet.
Should be able to.
And that too. How'd you go, Emmett?
All done, mate.
Tell me some good news.
All new foam.
Oh,
good
you
flow.
foamed it up.
Yeah, mate.
I was going to ask you about that.
Pipes done.
Mint. So what have I got to do now is crimp
Crimp some
use
hoses.
these.
Run some hoses. So whether you take some hose with you and the crimpers whenever you want to do it.
What about a high pressure and low pressure ports in between there?
We can make them in the hose. Put
Yep.
joiners in the hose.
Yep. Sweet.
You can buy them there with a fitting in it, so we can always just put them in if we need to.
Yes, please.
Easy
All right.
done.
Can I borrow the crimpers and
Yeah,
bring
mate.
them? All right, sweet. Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. Cheers. Legend.
worries.
Thank you. Massive shout out to Emmett at Noosa Radiators for soldering these fittings on for me. But one thing I did forget was the high pressure and low pressure ports. So they are these crimps you can put in the center are available. We were going to weld on the pressure ports to the fittings, but because some idiot chopped them too small, there's actually not really enough room to weld them on there. So we're just going to go with these crimp-on fittings. I've borrowed the crimpers from Luke, so I can crimp these at home. But basically, it's just a steel fitting with the hose, and you just crimp it on, cut the hose to length, and route the hoses where necessary. Once you've cut your hose to length, using a permanent marker, just line the hose up as to where you want it to sit. The hose does want to go one way, so you have to kind of orientate it where you want. We've got to have the low pressure port facing a suitable location too. We're going to use the hydraulic crimpers. These are just a generic crimper. It's the same as you'd use for battery cabling or any other hose. So lining it up with your permanent marker in the center here, using the jaws, using the correct size jaw too. This is number 10 reduced hose, this one. And then basically get some hydraulic action, making sure it's lined up. Make sure this hose is fully seated. And then Vic's your uncle. Give it a quick crimp. And that's done. Easy as that. Got to do the rest of the fittings, and that means the aircon system should be fully sealed and ready to vac and gas once we get the engine out of the car, rebuilt, engine bay painted, and all done. But stoked to have aircon.
Well, Woody's been fiddling around with frivolities like air conditioning and stuff that you don't need. I've been starting the wiring process. We are using Haltech products as usual. But we're doing something a little bit different this time, or a bit of a combination, I guess. Haltech's got a good range of products now that you can actually mix and match to suit your application. So we've got the R5, which is the big dog with 5 plugs on it. That's probably why it's called a 5, but no one's sure. I've got that in my Crown. It works perfectly in that. Obviously, it's a PDM and an ECU built into one, which is which is quite unique in the market. Haltech's the only one that is doing that as far as we are aware. They've now got this R3, which is the little brother, so it's got 3 connectors on it. That's still a PDM and ECU built into one, but it's got less inputs and outputs, obviously, because it's got less plugs on it, but it's very capable as well, and targeted at sort of a market that's probably this sort of car. I could probably talk about this stuff all day, but might get a bit boring. So we're using the R3, which is great, but we're also using a PD16. This is a power distribution module in itself. That goes in the rear of the car. We're going to use that to power up things like the fuel pumps, the trans brake, and we're also going to use its extra ins and outs to take information from the sensors on the transmission back to this unit, and then they will be relayed forward via the CAN cable to the main unit, the R3. So heaps of options. You can sort of juggle around how many ins and outs you want, what sort of ins and outs you want. The 25 amps are a big consideration because most cars like this have got a lot of high current draw that you need to account for. So in this case, we got 8 25 amps, whereas if we used an R5, you got 4. But of course, you can then use combinations of any of them. So the best place to start, I find, is to just write everything down. So here I've written down everything that we need or want, and then I've sort of assigned them in a mud map to the available things that we have. So that's the ECU and that's the PD16. Before that, I did one for Elite 2500 and PD16, and we sort of decided that we might go for an R3 and PD16 instead. You can use the PD16 with any of the Elite series ECUs as well as the Nexus series, so it's a very handy unit. From here, as you can see, I'm starting the wiring layout process. This is quite a little bit of a daunting job. It takes time and patience, and it also takes quiet and not being asked questions, Woody. But
What's for lunch?
It's another story. So yeah, I'm laying everything out in its paths of where I want it to run on the engine, and then after I've done that, I then cut them to length. Then we can transfer it over to the bench and start terminating things. That's much easier than this part of it.
Speaking of stupid questions, is there enough outputs for my pie warmer in the back?
No. I made sure I used them all up because I knew you'd want to do something silly.
Yeah, well, what about an
You
inverter?
want
What
a
about
fuel pump or a pie warmer?
240 volt inverter so then I can run a microwave?
What sort of battery are you going to put in it? And how many alternators? We can get rid of the aircon unit and put another alternator there if you want. The wiring is pretty much done here. We are waiting for a couple of connectors, but they can be done later. We wanted to do the wiring now. We normally wait until just before it's ready to start, but we have to pull the engine back out again, and it's got to have the bay painted and everything. So we just wanted to do this now to go along with the stuff that's got to be done in the back. My side of things is the PD16, which is running the fuel pumps and the transmission basically. It's in the rear of the car next to the battery, and then Woody has got some mad scientist stuff going on in the back there with like fridges and bloody lithium batteries and all sorts of crazy crap that I avoid as much as I avoid air conditioning.
I don't know why you can wire ECUs, but when it comes to anything basic 12 volt like a tail light, you hate doing it.
I can wire it, I just am not interested in it. Like air conditioning, what do you want aircon for?
Because it's a cruiser car. It's pretty well a Sahara. Look at it.
Yeah, well, it practically is now. All it needs is a cappuccino maker. Let's go in the back and see what's going on here, because Woody's going to have to explain it, because there's lots of cutting and expander foam involved.
Can you replace the bulb in my Pajero? I've got a tail light out.
No. Take it to Super Cheap, I'll do it for you.
I won't be installing a coffee machine, but I am installing a dual battery system. Why do I need a dual battery system? Well, if you come over here, you'll see that I've installed a fridge over here, complete with lemon squash. This is an XTM 12 litre fridge. I had this plan in my head for so long, like having the surge tank down there. I did a quick measure up and went, sweet, a fridge will fit there. I've pulled it apart. I've definitely voided warranty with the fridge, but don't worry about that. I've pulled the plastics off it. I'm gonna have to wire it into the battery. So battery wise, dual battery. This here is a DIN53. This is a crank battery, powers the Nexus R3 and the PD16. Then I am also using a lithium battery. So Super Cheap Auto have got a massive range of batteries, and new to the range is this bad boy here, Power Lithium. The battery I'm using, which is mounted just on the floor down here, is a 135 amp hour battery. It's massive for what I want to do with it. That's the kind of thing that you put into like the Pajero or your Ute or something. And being that it's slimline with Utes, you can put this behind the back seats, up against the headboard. They actually fit really well. I've put it under the passenger seat there because it works really well in that location. We're going to run wires for everything. I've also got a DC to DC charger for the lithium battery, and then got to run cables for the fridge. Everything's still in shambles. There's wires everywhere. The seats are out, carpets are up, because we're not quite there yet. We're still waiting on a bulkhead. We're still waiting on a few connectors. So we're going to get there eventually, but not quite yet. So you might laugh at the fridge, but when we're at the track and I'm the one with lemon squash in my fridge, then you'd be like, yo, hey Woody.
You mean when I'm in the back?
Yeah, well, when you're in the back and we're racing people.
Doing 140 down the back straight.
It'll all be worth it.
That's what I was envisaging.
I did try to put an inverter somewhere too, but there's not enough room, and that is going a bit far. But the plan is I can go to the track. I've got USB ports so I can charge GoPros, charge cameras, and I can also drink lemon squash responsibly while I'm there.
Few more jobs ticked off. We've got it all wired up mostly. We'll finish it off when the engine goes back in, but the majority of the work's done. There's probably a good 4 days of sitting at a bench doing this work and covering the floor with wires and junk and walking inside the house with electrical tape stuck on your foot, that sort of thing. But it's all part of the process. It's got to be done. So something we don't have to worry about later. Next we're going to pull the engine and transmission back out, and Woody's going to do the engine bay painting. When I say Woody's going to do it, that means I'm not going to do it, which is painting engine bays is not my favourite thing.
Hopefully Shane can give me a hand. It's all good. I'll nail it.
There's not much to it anyway. I just give it a scuff off.
That's what I'm planning to do.
Blow some spray cans over it.
And that's it.
Be sweet. But yeah, once that's done, we'll while the engine and transmission's out, we're going to do the engine modifications. Like it's going to be a stock bottom end so to speak, but we're still going to do valve springs and head gasket and head studs, all pump gears, the stuff that is known to be problematic with even an FG turbo engine, which is a good standard engine. The transmission's pretty old, so it's been sitting around for about 5 years built, but we're going to take it back to Mark and just strip it down just to check that it's not corroded inside or whatever just from sitting. So we'll make a video about Turbo 400's internals. That'll be something interesting. We've done Power Glide, so it's always interesting to have a look inside these things. Turbo 400 is an excellent budget transmission for big power stuff, so it's always a good option. You might have noticed that there's one wheel missing off the car. We've sent that stub axle down to Hoppers Crossing to Hopper Stoppers so they can basically check that this Japanese model is similar to the one that they've already done, which is an Australian delivered model from, I think, a few years before this, maybe 85 or something. I think it was the last one that they sold here. So they wanted to make sure that it was the right one, and we're going to go for a big 4-spot caliper and have a decent set of brakes on this because it's going to be heavy. I wouldn't be surprised if we tip 2 ton in this, so the Barra is probably going to be a good thing in that case. We might need to put a blower on it as well just to get some bottom end power, and once it's got 7 fatties in it, it's probably going to need a big block Chev underneath the blower. So.
Nothing like adding fridges and batteries to your already heavy car.
Yeah.
On top of all the car builders and...
You need to put a 1VD in
insulation. 1VD? Gosh.
I'd like to say thanks to everyone who supported the show by buying merch. It's definitely a big help to us in continuing to create content for you. So we appreciate it. We know that it's a pretty tough time there in a lot of countries with inflation and whatnot. So, make sure you buy food before you buy hoodies.
Also, I want to give a mad shout out to all of our Patreon supporters, especially those that have been there since day one. There's some names that are they never go away. And David's cancelled. David's cancelled. That's okay. No, seriously, all the Patreon supporters, if you're watching this on a Monday or a Tuesday before the ads turn on, you are legends, and we really do appreciate your support. Thank you, everyone. And same thing, if times are tough, please, just pay the bills first. Ad-free videos come after, so...
You can watch the ads instead.
I hope everyone just doesn't switch off now. It's so long.
That's all we got time for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
How's it right at the end?
Oh, you motherfucker.
Max. Yo.
What's happening, dude?
Are you coming around to the shed?
Yeah, are you still there?
Yeah, I've got some lemon squash in the fridge for you.
Yeah, I see you.
It's like a pipe, not a saxophone.
It's a mini saxophone.
Can I put this on YouTube or not? Am I allowed to do that?
No, you can't. My mum watches, bro.
Yo, my name is Woody and I've got a loud voice. Yo.
You know about that, young fella? When the engine goes back in, it's always a little bit daunting at first, but once you get stuck into it...
Sorry. Zoom. Can you give me some more enthusiasm? You sound like you're about to cry. Is something wrong?
No, I'm just bored.
Yeah. Well, come on, give me...
Where's my power lithium?
You got a massive one over there. Yours is too big.
Yeah, but this one's flat. It fits in the back of the ute better. It's got Bluetooth.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you can connect to your phone too. It's good.
Bluetooth technology.
Yeah, dog. I do a bigger one than this, and it's like 60 mil thin, but like 770 long.
Damn.
So, you could put that in your tray, maybe.
Yeah.
But you're not going to use your ute for that anyway, you're not?
What, for camping?
Yeah, but you've got the back open without any setup in there. Or do you eventually want to set it
haven't
up?
done it yet.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Not retired
I'm
yet.
stoked. That's good. That's going to work so well.
there. Then I just got to run some cables back to the fridge. Why do I need a dual battery system, you say? Because if Alan comes over here, you'll see that these has your toe. Oh, look at this nice fridge in here for your lemon squash. Actually, we definitely should put lemon squash in
Look
there.
very nice.
Let's do that again. Hang on. Is that your toe?
Always standing on intercool.